Mark Williams-Thomas, a TV journalist and former police detective who exposed sex offender Jimmy Savile. Mark, thanks for making time to speak to us this evening. We've just run through the latest developments. It's a very fast-moving story, facts emerging sort of hour by hour at the moment. Just talk to me a little bit about what you've made of the statements that we've had over the past few hours, the statement from the family and what we're now hearing from the Sun newspaper.
Yeah, good evening. A real debacle. We've now got a situation where it's turned again on the BBC and such similarities to the work that we did when we exposed Savile. We went to the BBC in the weeks prior to Savile's expose as a programme, and we said to them, we've got these allegations, and they basically rebutted them and said that they didn't have any credence at all and completely ignored us. It then got closer to broadcast, and of course huge publicity followed, and as a result of that the BBC then changed their account. What we've got now is a situation where the story has become very much more about the BBC than it is really about this young person. We've got a situation where we've got quite a fractioned family between the young person and mum and stepdad. They have obviously been to the BBC, given their account to the BBC. The BBC, in their mind, didn't act swiftly enough, and as a result of that, they went to the press. The Sun have obviously tonight come out and said very clearly they stand by their account. There's been more information will come out in the papers tomorrow. The BBC have quite clearly acted inappropriately. Let's be very clear, up and down the country, there are allegations made against very significant individuals, very regularly, and what it is for those authorities to take the appropriate action. Safeguarding measures have been in place now for a long time. This individual, and I called for it on Saturday night, should have been suspended. They did eventually on Sunday suspend them. But the question now, and what it would appear, is actually very little communication has been had with that individual, because that individual has been allowed to effectively front up a certain amount of things prior to their suspension, but of course after the allegations have been made. It's a very sad situation we're in now, because there are other BBC presenters, and some of them I know very well, I've spoken to, and they've had to come out and try and effectively clear their own name to say, well, it's got nothing to do with me. The reality is, and I wrote about it today, is that the press are not going to release who this individual is. It's a bit similar to Rolf Harris. It will be down now to that individual, either coming out themselves or through a third party, through a lawyer, making some kind of announcement, or ultimately an MP, as you say, going out in the House and actually releasing this individual's name.
Now, there's so many different angles to approach this from. I just want to reiterate and make clear to our viewers that, of course, we brought up Jimmy Savile as a reference because that is what you have the major experience in. But, of course, we're not saying that the allegations here are close to that, nor to Rolf Harris. But that is all to do with broadcasting and the way that this has been handled. In terms of the scrutiny that the BBC is getting for this, then, do you think it's because it is publicly funded that it is getting this increased scrutiny as compared to, say, the scandal that unfolded at ITV a few weeks ago? I mean, there was still a lot of news about that.
No, I mean, the ITV took huge scrutiny in relation to Philip's actions and also their actions, and they still remain under scrutiny themselves because there is an investigation underway by KC in relation to that. The position of the BBC, of course, the BBC is an iconic organisation, an organisation that upholds, for many people, a status of respectability. People look to the BBC to give them news that they respect. Less so now, because there was obviously more scrutiny applied to the BBC with the other different channels around, and because of some of the major failings of the BBC. But they still are iconic in terms of respectability. And what we have is an allegation against an individual who themselves is very highly regarded, not just at the BBC, but across broadcasting as a whole. And of course, that means that we are now in a position where the BBC needs to build some trust up. And transparency is always the key in relation to this. Be open, be transparent, follow processes and procedures. They had over 50 days prior to the suspension where they had knowledge of an allegation being made. And indeed, it was only until the Sun released their exclusive on Friday that they took action to suspend the individual. They should have been proactive. They should have taken a position where they said, you know what, impartially, we're going to suspend this individual. We're going to take the matters very seriously. We're going to liaise with the appropriate authorities, be it the police or children's services, and we're going to provide whatever support is necessary for the person who's making the complaint. All very, very simple processes. They didn't do any of that. They hunkered down and they tried to see if this would go away in exactly the same way as they did with Savile.
And in your experience of the way that the BBC has handled prior scandals, and you brought it up in your first answer, I want to talk about the fact that this major law firm, we just mentioned it there in the opener to our show, has been hired apparently by the alleged victim to represent them and to deliver that statement to the Sun newspaper. What did you make of hearing that?
Yeah, I mean, listen, this is a work where I not just in relation to my investigative reporting role, where I deal with the most sensitive of issues and deal with issues where I have to hold people to account. I work across safeguarding. And so I work with many organizations who themselves face scrutiny and criticism. And it's always about being transparent. And I think it raises the question, you raised it yourself. Who's financed this law firm to come out and say what they have said? I think as soon as you get a law firm involved in something like that, to be able to say that, there is a big battle now going on. And of course, there is a loggerhead between the young person and his family, their family, which is obviously mum and stepdad. And then also we have the situation where the son is now involved, who's saying, well, we stand by the allegations that we've made because we have effectively carried out the due diligence necessary to publish this huge story. Let's be clear, and I've spoken to the Sun themselves. Let's be very clear. As they took on a massive, massive story, and prior to doing that, through their legal team and compliance, they would have checked it out with real tenacity and detail, and that is what caused them to subsequently, release that as an exclusive.
And at the heart of all this, Mark, is of course what seems to be a very vulnerable young person. And they have put in that statement from that law firm that the allegations are rubbish. It's very confusing for a lot of the public now seeing these allegations being levied now from the mother and the stepfather, front page of the Sun. As you say, they're standing by their claims as well, but saying that they did so because they were concerned about that vulnerable youngster, as they've put it, their drug addiction and the way that money would be funded to that habit. That is what they've claimed in the Sun, what caused them to approach the BBC. When you see all this with regards to this vulnerable young person, what are you most concerned about?
It's such a mess. It's such a mess, and it didn't need to get to this. We've got a young person who's clearly very vulnerable, who needs support, and whether or not their allegation is true or not, they needed support, and the BBC clearly needed to provide that and establish as quickly as possible whether or not that allegation is true. It would appear that they hadn't even spoken to, because there's other pieces of information I'm aware of it, that they hadn't even spoken to the male television presenter prior to the Sun releasing their account. This did not need to get to this stage, but because of the way the BBC have handled it, it has meant that we've got a vulnerable young person who's now being exposed. We've got a challenge between that young person and their parents in an open forum. We've got the Sun who are having to defend their position in respect of it, and rightly so, they should defend their position. But we shouldn't be playing this out in public. The reality is we've got an allegation made by a young person, and that young person now is being made even more vulnerable than what they were when they made when the parents made the allegation.
Mark, thanks so much for sharing your knowledge and experience on this topic this evening. Now, the consequences of the presenter not being named it's also had some vicious social media guessing games going on over who that person might be. Now, several high-profile BBC stars have actually spoken out to very clearly rule themselves out of the controversy as a consequence. These people include Match of the Day host Gary Lineker, BBC Breakfast John Kay, and Radio 2's Jeremy Vine and Ryland Clark. Radio 5 Live's Nihal Arthur Nayaka and Nikki Campbell have also denied these allegations. Now, Campbell telling listeners this morning he had notified the police after the false accusations, and news of the crisis rocking the BBC has also hit stateside. One person who rarely shies away from controversy, of course, Elon Musk, weighing in on this story. Now, the Twitter owner taking to his own platform, replying to the BBC's story regarding the suspension of their presenter over the weekend with a link to Jimmy Savile's Wikipedia page.